Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I'm going to be talking about Dungeons & Dragons in the year 1984. History of Dungeons & Dragons in 1984. We're going to look at that history of Dungeons & Dragons in 1984, the 11th year of Dungeons & Dragons history, through the filter of CLEAR. And CLEAR is catalyst, locations, entities, artifacts, and relationships. So who is our catalyst for Dungeons & Dragons in 1984? Well, it's a gentleman by the name of Robin Williams, who is an American comedic comedy. He's an American comedian, an American actor, and an American celebrity. And he is a Hollywood celebrity. Why is he a Dungeons & Dragons catalyst? Well, at this time, he is playing Dungeons & Dragons. And for the rest of his life, in interviews, whenever asked, he will express his love for Dungeons & Dragons and express that Dungeons & Dragons is a game that he plays. And this will start, this will be one of the beginning celebrities to come out and say, I play Dungeons & Dragons, I love Dungeons & Dragons, Dungeons & Dragons is important to me. And there's debate now on whether Dungeons & Dragons was considered to be nerdy or geeky. I think, when you have Dungeons & Dragons being presented in 1982 in the film E.T., it's being fully embraced by Hollywood. It has its own cartoon. I think, we look back on it with rose-colored glasses and say that we were the outsiders, but people playing Dungeons & Dragons from the very beginning, I think, they already had a lot of advantages, and Dungeons & Dragons was one of the advantages that was coming to them. Many of the people who were playing Dungeons & Dragons. And I kind of question now how nerdy Dungeons & Dragons ever really was, right? So, and one of the things you're seeing here is, Robin Williams is, incredibly charismatic. He clearly was able to get people to listen to him, to laugh with him, to laugh at him. He was able to control a room, and he was a very powerful, he's a powerful force in television. He would become a powerful force in movies, and he would be one of the first to say, Dungeons & Dragons is important to me. And Dungeons & Dragons has a long history with celebrity. Celebrities have attached themselves to the game for a long time. And that is certainly still continuing to happen to this very day. It's arguable it's happening more today than ever before, which is interesting. So what is our location for 1984? Well, our location for 1984 is Independence, Missouri. This is, Independence, Missouri is a city where Margaret Weis lives. Now, Margaret Weis is going to bring us Dragonlance, and with a gentleman by the name of Tracy Hickman. But Margaret Weis is one of the most important people involved in the growth of Dungeons & Dragons. The Dragonlance novels would bring a strong Dungeons & Dragons fiction to literally hundreds of thousands, maybe low millions, maybe even higher than low millions of readers for the Dragonlance Chronicles. And these would be books that you could read and really enjoy a good fantasy story, but never play the Dungeons & Dragons game. So, and this is helpful even for, there are parents who read the Dragonlance novels and never play Dungeons & Dragons, but say, hey, I feel more comfortable with my child playing Dungeons & Dragons, or with my children playing Dungeons & Dragons. Or for spouses who, they don't want to roll a bunch of dice, but maybe they can read a novel. And even for players and dungeon masters to realize that, stories, not only can stories be told at the table, but stories can be told in print. And so Margaret Weis, this brilliant, very smart woman, will an incredible gift for writing, will actually begin writing will bring forward the Dragonlance Chronicles, and she lived in Independence, Missouri. So that's our location for 1984, because that location is important in Dungeons & Dragons history, right? And so with that said, who is our entity for 1984? Well, our entity for 1984 is a gentleman by the name of William Gibson. Now, who's William Gibson? Well, William Gibson is the father of Cyberpunk, right? So Cyberpunk, William Gibson's books will really push this forward. The first of the really big Cyberpunk books, the books that cement Cyberpunk as its own genre, will be Neuromancer. So what does Cyberpunk, this really very science fiction based genre have to do with Dungeons and Dragons? Well, the reality is William Gibson will solidify, continuing going forward, will help to solidify America as this major force, not only within technology, but within art and within storytelling. And so the idea that Dungeons and Dragons, one of the most unusual storytelling tools that's ever been created, is coming from America. Like, people think when you do something as a one-off, people are like, well, you're a one-trick pony. But America is not a one-trick pony. William Gibson is an incredibly talented writer, and and he really brings forward Cyberpunk, and Cyberpunk captures the American zeitgeist and really becomes an exploration of what are we as human beings, what will our future be, right? Mirror shades and trench coats, right? And it starts to talk about cloning, and it starts to talk about what substances we use to enhance our mind and our intellect and our recollection. It starts to talk about cyber, about using machines to increase our body. These themes would be very much explored through Dungeons and Dragons, right? So today we have the Warforged, and so the Warforged is really almost a perfect projection of William Gibson's work into Dungeons and Dragons. So Dungeons and Dragons continues to impact American politics, American culture, and American society, but it is absolutely impacted by American politics, American culture, and American society. And cyberpunk is a major theme that's addressed and embraced within America, and cyberpunk will really very directly have some powerful impacts to Dungeons and Dragons overall. What is our artifact for 1984, the 11th year of history in Dungeons and Dragons? Well, the artifact is the Space Shuttle, right? So the Space Shuttle is now in its, it has been created, and it is making flights on a fairly regular basis. It's going up and it's coming back. So this is a vehicle that America has created and is going into space on a regular basis, going up, coming down, bringing stuff up into space, bringing stuff back from space. It's making travel to space like a cab ride, right? And this is really incredible. And again, with Dungeons and Dragons, people are coming home, and they're a lot of kids, a lot of college students, a lot of young adults, and even adults are sitting down and they're saying, let's visit a different world, right? And they're doing that with their minds, they're doing that with pen and paper, but it doesn't seem odd to them. And the reason why is we as a nation are literally building vehicles that are going to take us to a different world. And of course, this is before the Challenger disaster, and this is when the Space Shuttle is absolutely a sign of hope, a major sign of hope, and telling us that we, and this is 1984, when in America we really thought there was absolutely no limits. Nothing was going to stop us from taking every star in the sky, right? And so it's a really different time, and the Space Shuttle really is very much coloring the world that Dungeons and Dragons players and Dungeon Masters are gaming in, and making them feel like the idea of visiting worlds in fantasy really isn't so much fantasy, right? Not at all. That the idea of visiting other worlds is very regular. Okay. Now that's our artifact for 1984. What is our relationship for 1984? Well, our relationship for 1984 is Dungeons and Dragons' relationship to conventions. So Dungeons and Dragons would have a relationship with conventions where people get together and celebrate one thing together. And they have panels, and they have merchandise, and they have dances, and they have exhibits, and they have demonstrations, and hundreds, if not thousands of people gather together on weekends to share their love of one thing. Now, one other thing that conventions are is, a lot of people, I would say there are some people who say, in America, we have a tough time of it, right? There are a few people in America, there are some people who have a tough time in America, but the reality is, conventions are growing like crazy in the 80s because there's a lot of wealth in America. And in the 80s, there really was a ton of wealth in America. And conventions start to explode because we have exposable income for ourselves, and exposable income for our families. And it was pretty incredible. And so Dungeons and Dragons will be one of those things that people do at conventions. It's be one of those things that make conventions richer. And conventions will be something that makes Dungeons and Dragons grow, that makes there room for more products and more polyhedral dice and more play and more randomness and more products even beyond TSR, more tabletop role-playing games with completely different settings than Dungeons & Dragons. Conventions will enable all of that. And so Dungeons & Dragons has a relationship with conventions. That is a J. Scott Garibay clear understanding of the history of Dungeons & Dragons in the year 1984, the 11th year of Dungeons & Dragons history. Take care. Please consider liking and subscribing. Let me know your thoughts on Dungeons & Dragons in 1984 in the comments. And thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.